In 2015, Chief Inspector Victor Elisa, former borough commander of Haringey, offers an insight into the relationship between the general public and the police.
But I'll just start off with some of the premise that you made. Policing style in the UK is nowhere near the policing style in the US. We don't emulate them, we don't follow them. Society might follow the US in terms of years, but our policing styles are vastly different, nowhere near. And if I just give a very brief example, look at the way that the American police have dealt with incidents of dealing with black people compared to here. Look at their response compared to here. Vastly different. Let's look at the stats you gave in terms of Germany. So you're saying 85 bullets, yeah, in a whole year. And then you go on to the UK and it says 12,500 firearms incidents. Vastly different. So when someone phones up, so go back to that film, you got those officers going to a 60-year-old man's house, he ends up to be an imitation firearm. So the moment we get that call, someone mentions a firearm, we treat it with the utmost urgency, seriousness, and we'll deal with it as a firearm. So as the officer said on there, it just takes a second. It just took a second for that officer. If that 60-year-old man hadn't moved himself from behind the chair, whatever it was, he could have been shot. And then it ends up as an imitation firearm. So attending the incidents are vastly different to discharging bullets. We will not neglect attending the incidents. Again, as the officer said on there, sometimes people actually scale up the severity of what's happening to get the police there. And as he also said on there, you don't just turn up and give you a gun. The level of training of those officers are beyond anything else that anybody else has received. But I'll tell you one thing, I wouldn't do it, because regardless of the training that you get, you're the only one who makes that decision whether you pull the trigger. It has an enormous amount of psychological stress. That's what we put them through every single day. So we're not comparable to Germany, and the stats you're giving doesn't really reflect what it is that we're doing. And then you go on to all the other bits about preventative structure. Do you know what? There's very little preventing two cops. One in Germany who's got firearm in a stressful situation. Another one in the UK who's got a pepper spray. Do you know what? I'd rather that officer with a pepper spray was really stressed and he decides to pull out the pepper spray and spray me, rather than the officer in Germany who's really stressed and he thinks, that's my last resort to get out of this. That's the difference in terms of what we're talking about. So you can have all the prevention in the world, you cannot judge how someone's going to react in that moment of stress. So I say this requires far more discussion, and to try and answer it in a short space of time doesn't do it justice. If I go back to what you're saying, Ken, and I'll link it with yours, Mark, I think this issue about PR exercise, I think is really unfair. You know, the BBC have come along. The BBC came to Haringey for one reason. They wanted another riot. That's why they came to Haringey, yeah? Red, you're shaking your head.
It's not true.
Okay? It's not, of course it's not good. So when the BBC were doing the scoping, they went around and interviewed loads of people. They came and interviewed me. Yeah, they spent 2 hours with me. I never saw him again for 6 months. Okay? Oh, all of a sudden, we're coming to the inquest. We're coming to the result of the inquest. Mark Duggan. Oh, Haringey is such an interesting place all of a sudden. Oh, Vic, you're the best man. You're the one we want to be with. Do we come and film with you? So it could have gone the other way. Right? It could have been a mistake. So when we go through 18 months of filming everywhere in the Met, and we don't have the stereotype that we think we ought to have, you know, police officers swearing, police officers being racist, police officers being dysfunctional, police officers being incompetent, it becomes a PR exercise. We start off by saying nobody walks into work to do anything wrong. I don't. The vast majority of people don't. And if that portrays the mundanity of police work, the regularity of police work, that's what it's all about. And I think it's unfair to actually classify it as a PR exercise. I don't think it is.
I didn't really say that.
Okay, so in response to what you said, Moses, you were asking about officers, about relationships. And I think that there is some effort to improve relationships between the police and communities. I found it interesting in the film because, and I find it interesting when people talk about the black community or the minority ethnic community. That's rather strange to me. Is there a white community There isn't any such thing. We're all different. There is no black community. There are black communities.
I think we're human beings.
Pardon?
Human beings.
Exactly, human beings. We are, but we're human beings with difference. And we're all different. And so there isn't one way, and there isn't one size fits all, and that's very true. That's very, very true to say. But I do think that there are efforts being made to improve relations. I think, for me, I think that certainly one of the things in my role that I do, and we've done this at Selby for many, many years. I've done this in my chairing responsibilities at Selby, and in my professional role, is unless you're listening to the people with whom you are providing the service, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I mean, I think Victor said at some point, I think he said it in the film about policing by consent and so on. And that's a phrase that I've heard for many, many years in the police, having worked with with many police services around the country in the aftermath of Stephen Lawrence. We police by consent. I think that needs to be lived as well as said. It's very easy to talk about policing by consent, but I think that needs to be demonstrated, and so that to me is about engaging with those with whom you provide a service. I'm sure some of you in here remember that when the police was called a police force. I still hear that phrase now, and it's quite an oppressive phrase, that actually, force, and the ideas of what goes with force. I prefer police service. I'm not saying that I've heard anybody say that this evening, by the way. But I'm just saying, I think I think the operative word there is service, and I think that needs to be remembered, and I think we could go a long way with that. In relation to that's kind of wrapped up with what steps should the police take, and again, Victor's talked about affirmative action. There are only 2 countries in the world that have had affirmative action. One is the United States of America, and the other one is South Africa. What's very, very interesting about that, having lived and worked in South Africa, in both of those countries, I've lived in America for 9 years, and I've worked in South Africa many times. What's very interesting about that is affirmative action has changed things. Whether people agree with it or not, you know, people will talk about it's not fair to give an advantage to one group over another, when the reality is there's always been an advantage. Because that advantage may not have been formal, is irrelevant. There has always been an advantage in this country. There is an advantage, and has been an advantage, in police services, and in many other services, by the way, for people of white ethnicity. That's life, and that's the way it is. I would suggest that affirmative action is not wholly responsible, but one of the reasons why there is a black president in the United States of America is because of affirmative action. Because of course there is a significant black middle class in America, and people who are in positions of influence now, which maybe we have a smaller proportion of the populations here, of minority ethnic populations who are in those positions. So it's sad that the government has said no to this. It's very sad that the government has said no. And I think it's important that we know that, because for me that would be yet another reason to point a finger at the police and say, oh yeah, they talk big about bringing in affirmative action and they haven't done it. We have a government who absolutely will not do that. And by the way, it's not just this government, so I'm not going to get political on this in terms of political alliances, because previous governments have said exactly the same. The Labour governments have said the same. So affirmative action is something that we will not be doing in this country. But there are lots of things that one can do with positive action in terms of recruitment and retention, and in working with communities, and that's proven in many areas, in many services in our country. So there are still improvements needed in the ways that the police recruit and in how they engage. But if you go back further than that, we need to go back to the issue of trust in the police, and they're not going to get that pool that Victor talks about until the issues of trust are really solved. And that's that on that. Was there anything else? Yeah, people say the borough feels calmer. I would say, as as a person both from this borough and all over London, nationally, my job is a national job, so I'm all over the country. I would say in some ways, I think that there is a calmer response towards policing. But again, I'm going to go back to something you said in the film, which is that you inferred in the film that we could be just minutes away yet again, because one spark and it's off again, and we're right back to where we were. Roger Sylvester, Cynthia, we could go on and on and on, and we're right back to where we were then. So yeah, it may feel calmer, but that's not sustainable.